Lord, your word is truth. Sanctify us by truth. 3 boys in the schoolyard arguing about their fathers. The first boy said, "My dad scribbles few words on a piece of paper. He calls it a poem." And they gave him $50. They pay $50. The second boy says, "That is nothing. My dad scribbles few words on a piece of paper and he calls it a song." They give him $100. The third boy, "I got you both beat. My father scribbles few words on a piece of paper and he calls it a sermon. And it takes 4 people to collect all the money." His father is a Pentecostal pastor, not a Roman Catholic. I think one of the days our faith formation will screen this movie, Archbishop Romero. I've seen it about 3 times. Every time I saw, within me triggered to renew my priestly vocation, priestly ministry. This Archbishop Romero was informed that the soldiers have vandalized the church. He goes to the spot, he walks into the church, he sees all these military soldiers with all arms playing cards, desecrating the church. And the bishop stays and says, "This is a holy place. Jesus lives here. He is in the most precious, his body and blood is there in the precious, in the most tabernacle. He's present in the tabernacle. His presence is there in the church." The soldiers take their gun and shoot the Blessed Sacrament, the tabernacle. And they push the bishop out and the bishop goes out. Then he walks again inside the church when all the soldiers take their guns and start shooting at him. He bends down, collects all the Eucharist that was scattered from the tabernacle. In another scene, you will see the soldiers strip him, and he stays outside the church. He was thrown again in another place, was thrown out, not to celebrate Mass in the church. With the people out, he celebrates the Eucharist outside. If those of you remember, October, not this October, the last October we had carbon monoxide. No, we all celebrated half of the Mass outside the church. Something like that. The bishop stays out and celebrates the Eucharist. The third occasion, he celebrates the Mass with the nuns in a chapel. As he was doing the consecration prayer, he was shot dead. And all these things happened in 1980s in El Salvador, where thousands of people were killed and massacred. The whole movie is centered around the Eucharist. Archbishop Romero, there was a change in his life. When he was consecrated a bishop, he was just like any other bishop, having fun, going around, enjoying with the rich people. When he saw the massacre and the priests killed, then there was a change when he saw the whole scene there. And the whole movie is centered around the Eucharist, how he was being motivated and pulled by this Eucharist. In US, Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen, he was a very popular television personality. And people ask him, how is that you give such an inspiring, touching, moving message? He changed people's lives. People who were addicts gave up. Broken families came together. He was a great source of inspiration. They asked him, how do you get this inspiration? Every day, 1 hour before the Blessed Sacrament. Every day, 1 hour in the presence of the Lord. How do you do this? Cleaning the worms, stinking and dying people. Mother Teresa was asked. And the press reporter said, if you give me $50,000, I wouldn't do this work. And she also said, neither will I do it. I also don't like to do it. But what prompts you to do? The sacrifice of Jesus on the Calvary. He gave his body and blood. It is that shedding of his body and blood the presence of His in the most precious, blessed sacrament of the altar. The presence of Christ motivates me to do this. And my dear friends, I just given an example of these. Every saints were moved and been prompted by and inspired by the presence of Christ in the church, in the most blessed sacrament of the altar. A 12-year-old little boy, like all our altar service, Tarsius, who was carrying the communion to somebody in the prison. He was beaten up by his friends. Blessed Emily, Maria Coretti, Dominic Savio, all these saints were motivated and inspired by Jesus in the precious blood and in the altar. My dear friends, today the church invites us to celebrate this great mystery. I know a movie star in India from a very orthodox Brahmin, very popular Orthodox Brahmin. Brahmins cannot get converted. She was so restless, agitated in her life. She was looking for meaning and peace in her life. She went to the church, Church of God, Lutherans, Anglicans, Seventh-day Baptists, you name it, all the churches. She started going. She was inspired to go to a retreat center, Divine Mercy Retreat Center. And meanwhile, all those 3-4 years of our life journey, searching for God, meaning in our life, and she did a lot of research, reading, a lot of praying. In the retreat center, she went to, in Kerala, to Divine Mercy Retreat Center. And she's in US, she's living in US. She is a messenger, she is a gospel preacher, she is a witness. She goes around to say, Catholic Church is the true church. Why? Not just because Jesus founded it, because the real presence of Christ in the most precious tabernacle. God is present, He is there. And every time she went into the church, she felt that grace, she felt that feeling of being inspired and motivated by the presence of the Lord in the blessed sacrament. And my dear friends, that is what we believe. In the journey to Emmaus, breaking of the bread and sharing of the word, their eyes were opened, their hearts were burning in the presence of the blessed sacrament. In the Eucharist that we celebrate every day, Jesus is present. And that's why we see this Greek word, Eucharisto, means thanksgiving, inviting us to thank the Lord. The first reading in Deuteronomy, Moses says, remember and do not forget. And what is he trying to remind people? Remember, you were once a slave. Remember, you were in captivity in Egypt. And God has brought you to a land where honey and milk flows, to a promised land, people who have been set free. Remember, God walked with you when you were walking in the Red Sea. God walked with you as a cloud. God walked with you as a fire, leading you. Remember and do not forget, God is present with you. Eucharist means presence. God is present. God provides. And let us remember, my dear friends, that God's presence is there in the church. And church is a place where we all come together as a family. That reminds us that it is a meal. It is a celebration together as one family. We share in the one table, one cup, one bread. And we are one body. And that's why in the second reading, St. Paul reminds people of Corinth. They all come to share, but they were all divided. They had been discriminating the rich and the poor. They had different sections of people. All the haves and have-nots. All the wealthy would join together and eat and share. And the poor will be eating what is there and the leftovers, and people with none. And Paul could not accept that division and discrimination when people came to share the Eucharist. He wants them because we share in unity. Eucharist is a meal that calls us to experience this oneness, this unity, and this fullness. We eat, we get digested. We again eat, we get digested, we keep eating and eating. Today's gospel reading, Jesus tells, if anyone who eats of me will live forever. Our ancestors ate manna and it got digested. It went into the biological system, got digested, and they all died. And if you eat of me, you will never die. And what about our physical death? It is our physical death. We all die, the body dies. Because when we receive Jesus who comes into our hearts, Jesus who is living, He is God. God cannot die. He comes into our hearts, He becomes part of our being. So we don't die. We believe in the resurrection of our spiritual body, and we have no death. We live forever. Whoever eats the bread will live forever. Abide in me. And my dear friends, this is a constant invitation the Eucharist invites us. And the third important message the Eucharist gives us, Eucharist means giving, sharing. There is an amount of sacrifice. Acts of the Apostle, chapter 20, verse 35, Luke reminds people, as Jesus said, but nowhere in the Gospel it is mentioned. Luke says, remember what Jesus said. There is more joy in giving than in receiving. More joy in giving than in receiving. As human, often we receive, we get and we forget. God gives and He forgives. And we are in His nature and we are called to give unconditionally. Little more love to our husband, wife, children, parents. Little more of care, little more of gentleness, little more forgiving, little more of love. Little more and little more. And that keeps us growing. The more we give, the more we receive Jesus in our hearts. And today, my dear friends, we celebrate this beautiful celebration of Eucharist, thanksgiving, thanking the Lord for giving Himself, and thanking the Lord to helping us to experience Jesus in our hearts, that we may give, that we may share, we may live in unity, we may experience the presence of Christ, just not in the church, that we may carry Christ in our hearts. We may take Him home. We may pass Him on to our family, in our relationship, in our friendship, in wherever we are. That the Eucharist will be lived in the church, outside the church, in our lives, and that world may experience the presence of Christ. Amen.